So welcome to the October Spark session. I'm stoked to have Claire Kittle here. We haven't done a Spark session with her before, and I've worked with her a lot on and off over the years through Talent Market. She seeks talent for the free market movement, and she's darn good at it. And something that's come up a lot lately are questions about how to hire a good communications director or communications hire. I would say marketing director, VP of marketing. All of that can be challenging, especially if you haven't, I guess, expanded that part of your organization much before, the first time you're adding that department. So Claire, I'm just going to ask you to tell us a bit about yourself before we jump into the presentation.
Sure. So I run an organization called Talent Market. We are a free market nonprofit serving other free market nonprofits. We help organizations find the talent they need. We also engage in a lot of consulting related to talent and human capital in general. Before starting Talent Market, which was 8 years ago, I worked for a state-based think tank, and before that I worked for a free market foundation in DC. And I think that's probably enough rambling, and I have so much to say. Can I jump in? Can I start?
Go for it. So you've put together an awesome presentation, so we're going to let you roll with it.
Sounds good. All right, y'all. Today we're going to cover a number of things, and my computer is not working, so I'm just going to, there we go. My goodness gracious. So we're going to cover a number of things, and I've got about 30 minutes to do it, and I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm going to talk fast. So if you haven't had your coffee for this morning, get it in your system. We are going to cover 3 things we want to learn from the interview process, and then we're going to talk about 5 tools we want to utilize to get the information we need to find the best communications director. And then, like I said, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So let's
get Let me interject.
Yes.
Let me take you off your rails. Okay,
yeah.
So Q&A. By the way, if you have a question for Claire, at the top of your screen is a Q&A box. That's where you put it. It might be at the bottom of your screen, Claire. I have a couple questions that were emailed in, but just throw them in there as you go. Okay, I'm out.
Perfect. By the way, Nicole sent me a few questions beforehand, and I actually had time to weave those into the presentation. So I'll be addressing a few of those during the presentation, but then we'll have time at the end as well. All right, so let's set the stage with this. Why does finding the right person matter? Well, I'll illustrate that with a story. This gentleman, probably not familiar to you, but his name is Rodney Alcala. He was on The Dating Game. Remember that show back in the 70s, if you're old enough to remember it? So anyone who knows me knows I always compare hiring to dating, which is why we're going to talk about a guy who appeared on The Dating Game. So he went through the dating game and he actually won the date, right? So the way it goes is one person sort of interviews 3 people and then they choose who they want to go on a date on. So who they want to go on a date with. She chose, the gal who was on the show chose Rodney Alcala. Unfortunately for her, it turns out he was a serial killer. I'm not joking. So fortunately for her, he did not kill her, but he was arrested several years later, charged and convicted of killing, I think, 7 people. And then later police estimate he probably killed northwards of 50 people. So what's my point? My point is you want to surround yourself with the right people, because doing the opposite could prove very dangerous. Whether it's dating or hiring, finding the right person matters. And because the communications director you hire is going to be the voice of your organization, choosing the right voice is absolutely critical for your organization's success. So with that, let's go over the 3 things we want to learn before we make a hire, and then the 5 tools we want to use to get us there. So I think there are 3 basic things you want to be thinking about as you go through the interview process. 1, is this person a culture fit? Are they philosophically aligned with our organization? Do they share the same values and principles? Do they have a personality fit with us? And then is their work ethic aligned with ours? And then, of course, skill fit, right? This is the most obvious one. Do they have the knowledge and experience necessary to do the job that we have open now? And then finally, are they a logistical fit? So is the salary aligned? Are they available to start when you need them to start? Can they relocate? All that good stuff. So here are the 5 tools I think you want to use to find that information out. The application, the interview, references, a test project if necessary, and then the intangibles. So we're going to walk through those 5 now. Let's start with the application. So before we get into the application per se, I want to talk about the fact that you have to start with a solid job description. I know this sounds pretty Captain Obvious, but I have had some clients send me some really bad 2-paragraph job descriptions, and they say, Claire, we don't understand why we can't find somebody good. We've been advertising this pathetic job description for 6 months. Why is nobody calling? Well, that's probably why. So let's go over the things you want to put in your job description. Number one, you've got to have a hook. You've got to get people excited about working for your organization. If you're not excited about what you're doing and what you're accomplishing and how you're affecting social change, how do you expect a communications director to be excited about it? 2, you've got to talk about what needs to be done. So these are the responsibilities we'll have you handle. You need to talk about who you need. So this is the ideal candidate, the ideal background. You may want to include information about why the role is open if it's relevant. Now, if you had to fire the last person, probably don't want to include that. But let's say you're growing and this is your first or second communications hire. Put that in there. Say we're growing, good things are happening, and we want to hire a new comms person. And then finally, you explain what application materials you need from the candidate and how they apply for the job. Now, I want to share with you a fantastic example of a job description. I know you're all saying, Claire, I can't read that. That's like size 2 typeface. I'm happy to send you guys a PDF of this afterward. Just ask me for it. I can send it to Nicole or Tim and get it out to you. But this is not actually a comms director job description. It's a program officer description. But it came from my friends at the Course Foundation, and it was so fantastic that I use it all the time when people say, tell me about a good job description. But let me just highlight a few things for you. The hook. They start with this paragraph. Before you read another word, please Google Course family. Please read every word of what you find, including the wacky conspiratorial stuff. If names like Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and Adam Smith freak you out, or if you think terms like traditional American values, capitalism, free markets, and personal responsibility are obsolete, this job may not be a fit. Oh my gosh, I love it. I read that and I'm absolutely hooked. I want to read more. I'm excited to work there because I know this group is, first of all, funny. I know they're direct. I know they get to the point, and I'm guessing they probably get stuff done. They go on to describe what they need the person to do. Then they talk about who the ideal candidate is, what the background should look like. And then finally, they talk about the application materials they need. So they really nail everything in this job description. Plus they do it with humor, which never hurt anybody. Okay, so let's specifically talk about that application that you're going to request. I think you should request at least 3 things. Number 1, a resume. Number 2, a cover letter. And don't just ask for a cover letter. Ask for a cover letter that has some specific ingredients included. Why the person is interested in your organization's mission, a rough idea of salary requirements, and then any other specifics you need. Let's say that you have to have a candidate who's got a deep media Rolodex in New York City. Well, ask them to give you an overview of that in the cover letter if that's one of those deal killers. And then finally, since this is a communications or marketing role, ask for some kind of writing sample or creative sample. Now, personally, I would request something that they have to write new and fresh for you. Why do I suggest this? If you don't do that, if you just say, send me a writing sample, they could send you something that they actually co-wrote with someone else. They could send you something that has been heavily edited by someone else. I like to ask for something they have to create new because you'll know it's their work, but also it kind of raises the barrier to entry a little bit. So people can't just shoot off a resume and cover letter, even if they don't really care. It tells you that anyone who applies for your job actually cares about working for you because they've taken the time to put together that writing or creative sample just for you. Okay, so now y'all have these amazing applications that are starting to roll in, and you've decided, okay, we're going to interview these people. Well, what does the interview look like? Let's set the stage a little bit. I like to make candidates comfortable. I know this is the opposite of what a lot of people do. A lot of people want to be very formal. They want to intimidate the candidate. I personally think that is a crazy idea. Why? Because it encourages the candidate to act. I don't want the candidate to act. I don't want them on their best behavior. I want them to let their guard down, and I want them to show me who they really are because I want to see what it's like when I hire them, right? So I do that through humor. I try to get them to just relax and be themselves. I think it works well. I had an interview earlier this week where the gal was cursing by the end of the interview. Mind you, I had not cursed first. There's a curse first rule. If somebody's interviewing you and they curse first, I guess you can curse, but I hadn't done that. But I guess I made her feel so comfortable that she decided to curse, which was really good information to have because what if she did that in front of a reporter? Or what if she did that in front of a donor? Anyway, so I like to use humor. The other thing I suggest is make the candidate talk first. So don't start by telling them, here's everything we need, and then ask them questions, because they're going to parrot back everything you just said. So ask the questions first, and then at the end, allow them to ask questions to you. Finally, don't put any more than 2 people in the room or on the phone with someone at one time. I really think 1 is the best idea, but if you have to do 2, do 2. I've heard some horror stories of organizations putting 3, 4, and 5 people in a room or on the phone with a candidate at the same time. That's just torture. It's not good for anybody, so don't do it. All right, now that we've set the stage, let's talk about the kinds of interview questions you want to ask. We're going to go over 2 kinds today. 1, basic interview questions. We're going to talk about cultural interview questions, skills-related questions, and logistical questions. And then I want to talk briefly about behavior-based interview questions. I've got an 11-page document with a ton of interview questions I'm happy to share with anybody. Again, I'll send it to Nicole, to Tim, to share with you guys, or you can just email me directly and I'll send this to you. So don't feel like you have to write furiously if you like any of these questions, because I can send them to you. But these are the questions I think you want to ask to get at the information you need. So let's start with the culture fit questions, because I think this stuff is super, super important. So here are the sorts of questions you might want to ask. What is the ideal size and scope of government? Name a few of your philosophical influences. Why does our mission appeal to you? Of the work we do, of the policy areas we engage in, which of them resonate with you? Tell me more about that. You get the idea, right? You want to understand if this person is philosophically aligned. But then you also want to get into things about culture. Will they fit in with your culture? So ask them what kind of culture is appealing to them. Ask them what their ideal boss looks like, that sort of thing. And then perhaps the most important question, if you are interviewing someone from outside of our world, why are you interested in coming into this world? I always think this question is very important, because some people will flat out tell you, nah, I'm not really interested in coming in this world. It was a job, it looked interesting, so I applied. I'm not saying that person should be immediately discounted, but it certainly means something. So let's dig into this culture question a little bit more. I want to share with you 3 very specific stories. And my warning is this: the culture shift for a communications director coming from another sector into our sector is a big one. And so again, 3 stories. I'll start with the first one. There was a gentleman that Talent Market helped place. So my fingerprints and blame are all over these 3 examples. There was a gentleman Talent Market helped place a few years back who came out of the political sector. And he said, oh, I'm really interested in working in the free market nonprofit world. And I think he was very sincere about that, but ultimately it didn't work. Culturally, he never really made the switch from the political world to the nonprofit world. And unfortunately, that relationship didn't work out. He no longer works for the organization. There was a second story, another gentleman we helped place who came out of the private sector. And he had been with a communications firm, and again, said he was very sincere about making the switch. And I think he was, but he ended up with an organization that didn't have a private sector mentality. Now, it's not to say they weren't, big into competition and results, but they weren't sort of cutthroat. And I think that's what he was used to. And ultimately, he couldn't make that culture shift either. And so that relationship ended. And then there's another story about a gentleman who came out of the private sector as well, who again said, I'm very excited about coming to work in this world, but was recruited away. I think it was under a year, recruited away to go back to the private sector. The private sector firm came and, dangled more money in front of the guy, and he left. So that was a situation where the organization was very happy with the person's performance. But for them, I think money was king. And so fulfillment didn't mean much for that person, in my opinion. And so they went where the money was. So those are my warnings about culture fit. Now I have a good story to share with you. I think sometimes the best communications folks are going to come out of the private sector. There's one particular person that we placed years ago who's still in the same spot, who I think is an absolute rock star. He came out of the agency world, out of a communications ad agency. And he was frankly tired of pitching Tide laundry detergent. He wanted to pitch Liberty, and he was really, really excited about it. So he's been here for years and years doing a great job. So there are definitely wins we have when it comes to getting folks out of other sectors. But you do want to be careful. You want to make sure the person is absolutely passionate about the ideas, because communicating the ideas of liberty, frankly, it's very difficult. It's a lot more difficult than to communicate about Tide laundry detergent, right? Make sure they have the right temperament. And make sure they're open to change, because if they can't adapt to our world and our culture, ultimately, it's probably not going to work. Okay, We had an audience question about this too, so I want to throw this in. Someone asked, how important is ideological alignment? And can it be something that builds over time, or must it be present on day one? I love this question. I'm going to punt initially and say, it's up to you. I will tell you that personally, I would never hire somebody for my organization, especially in a communications role, who was not 100% philosophically aligned. That's just me. Because the person would be serving as the voice of my organization, I would think it was critical that the person is completely philosophically aligned. I wouldn't want to leave it up to chance if they weren't. Now, I want to say there's a difference between not being aligned and not having a full grasp of understanding of all of the nitty gritty of what we do. So if you find somebody who is philosophically aligned, but they haven't read Human Action, right? I don't think you should eliminate them, because they can get up to speed on your issues, on the ideas, etc. Where I would be especially careful, though, is hiring somebody who's not sure if they really believe in this whole free market, limited government thing. I think those people are a huge risk. If for no other reason, then they may decide they don't like what you're doing and then somehow try to undermine your work. So it's something I personally would stay away from like the plague. But if you and your organization think it's right for you, if you're willing to take the risk, Godspeed, my friend. Okay, let's move on from that to skills fit. We want to know if the person is obviously a fit for the role we have at hand. Now, all of these questions that fall under skill fit are going to be 100% based on the job that you're hiring for. So these questions I've outlined here may or may not be a great fit. It just depends on the role. So I would look at your job description and I would develop these questions based on every responsibility you have this person handling. So here are some examples. Walk me through your experience developing a comprehensive communications plan. Tell me about your media relations experience. Tell me about your writing style and speed. Tell me about what you've done in terms of digital engagement. Have you messaged to different audiences? How do those messages differ? Tell me more. You get the idea. I want to highlight this last question because it actually relates to another audience question that we received earlier. The audience question was, what is the best tangible key performance? What are the best tangible key performance indicators to monitor performance? I'm sort of adapting that to how do we know the communications person is successful? If I gave you a great answer to this question, then I'm probably in the wrong business and I should be in the private sector killing it financially, because I think you've asked a very difficult question, but it's a great question and I think it should be asked. A lot of this depends on what you've put in your strategic communications plan, because you've probably developed one and it probably has goals and metrics included in that communications plan. So hopefully the answer you can sort of pull from the plan. But you probably want to be thinking like things like media placements or website stats, maybe media references. How many times were we referenced in articles about policy change? What about customer, donor, and public engagement? What about actual policy change, right? How have we moved the ball when it comes to actual policy change? Now, I highlighted this one because I've had so many clients tell me, well, our board thinks that we're really stretching it when we tell them we were part of tax reform in our state. And our board says, how do you know you were really part of tax reform? It's really hard to convince a board or a donor that, hey, listen, we were part of affecting this change over here. You really have to connect the dots. So that's not an easy thing to do. You may have to use proxy metrics. Was your organization asked to be at the table? Do you have a seat at the table in these key decision-making, policy decision-making discussions in your state? So anyway, this is a really, really difficult question. I've thrown out a bunch of ideas, but I think it's the sort of thing that you should probably have included in your strategic communications plan. And if you don't, you should call Nicole because she's going to have some great answers for you. All right, let's get on to logistical fit. So these, again, seem like pretty Captain Obvious questions, but you would be shocked how often people do not ask these. Let me share a quick story with you. I had a call from a client a few years ago. He said, Claire, I want to talk to you about making an offer to this candidate. Now, I had not been involved in the search up until this point. Okay, so he called me after the fact. And he said, we love this gal. We've brought her in 5 times. She's been in to meet every staff member, and we want to make her an offer. What do you think I should offer her? I said, well, I don't even know what the person's background is, so I'll need to know a little bit about that. But 2 things are key here, Bob. Bob, what do you want to pay? And then what does she want to earn? What's her desired salary range? And Bob said, oh, I haven't asked her. what her desired salary range is. I'll ask her and I'll get back to you. I said, okay. And I'm thinking, Bob, why didn't you ask this question? All right, so Bob calls me back later and he says, well, that's over. I said, what? And he said, she wants to be 50 grand higher than we can afford to pay. Bob, this is why you ask the question in the application and then you follow up and you ask it in the interview, because you don't have 5-10 hours to spend with a candidate who's 50 grand more expensive than where you can afford to be. So make sure you ask these questions up front, ask about them in the application, ask about them again in the interview, and don't wait until the 5th interview to ask it. Ask it in interview number 1. All right. So let's talk briefly about behavior-based interviewing. Before I explain what behavior-based interviewing is, I'm going to throw out a few behavior-based interview questions so you can kind of get a sense for what they look like. Some of you may not be familiar with them, but I think after seeing them, it'll make a lot more sense. So here's an example of a behavior-based interview question. Have you ever had to persuade a peer or manager to accept an idea that you didn't think they'd like? Tell us about the resistance you met and how you overcame it. A question like this is going to get at skill fit, and specifically, it's going to talk about how this person can be persuasive. Describe a time in which you were caught unaware by a problem or obstacle you hadn't foreseen. What happened? Again, this is going to get at skill fit, and it's going to demonstrate problem solving. Give me an example of a time when you had to address an angry customer or donor or client. What was the problem? What was the outcome? How did you help diffuse the situation? This sort of question actually can get at culture fit as well as skill fit, and it's going to demonstrate relationship management. And then give me an example of a project that you initiated that required you to go above and beyond your job description. This question is going to get at culture fit, and it's going to demonstrate initiative. Now, for all of these questions, they are included on that handout I mentioned. I'm happy to send you. And I probably have 100 different behavior-based interview questions in that document that get at very different traits. So you can literally go through before an interview and cherry pick the questions that you want to ask based on what role you're looking to fill. Okay, so let me explain the theory behind behavior-based interviewing now that you've seen a few of these questions. The premise behind BBI is that the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior, right? Kind of makes sense. So you're essentially asking the candidate to tell you stories. Tell me a story about a time when you did X or Y. Now, the key to a good behavior-based interview is not the person on the other side of the table, it's you. Why? Because these questions are not necessarily intuitive. So you're going to have to poke and prod the candidate a little bit and say, okay, tell me what happened then, tell me what happened then. So it's a lot of work on your end, but I think the answers can be well worth it. I don't ever suggest that you just do behavior-based interviewing without basic questions. It's not going to give you enough context. But if you can pepper the interview with a few behavior-based interview questions, you're probably going to find a lot more value in your interview. Now, we've talked about what to ask, but now we got to talk about what not to ask. Why do we have to talk about this? Because I don't want to see y'all in jail. Now, legal disclaimer, which is at the bottom in size 0.5 typeface. It says I'm not an attorney, because I'm not. I am married to one, and oddly enough, he's an employment attorney, so he actually okayed this slide. Here's the stuff I don't want you to ask about. Don't talk about race, color, religion, national origin, age, disabilities, medical history, marital status, sexual orientation, military discharge status, debt, bankruptcy, arrest record, conviction record, social drinking, drug habits, and child rearing plans. Why? Because those things have nothing to do with the job. It's not necessarily illegal to ask or to know the answers to these questions, but what's illegal is to discriminate based on these issues. So if you just don't ask them, then it's going to be really hard for someone later to say, you didn't hire me. And I think you discriminated because you asked me all sorts of questions about when I wanted to have kids, right? So just stay away from these topics. You'll thank me later. And lest you forget, we have a target on our back because we're free marketeers, and the other side would love to take us down. So please do not give them a reason to do that. All right, let's switch on to references. So we've gotten through the interview process. We're getting excited about candidates. Now we need to call references. So I think you should always check references. It's definitely worth an hour of your time. I just had a client about 3 weeks ago get really excited about a candidate, and he said, I'm getting ready to put together an offer, but I am going to call one of my friends who used to work with this guy. And he called me back a few days later and said, I'm not going to make the offer. And I said, what happened? And he said the reference was terrible. So now this was an unofficial reference, which we're going to talk about now. But the point is, he was dangerously close to making an offer. And when he found out the information from the reference, he realized that would have been a huge mistake. So definitely worth your time to check references. Now, a word about official versus unofficial references. Official references is that list you get from the candidate, 3 to 5 plus names. I think you should call those folks, right? It's low hanging fruit, doesn't take a lot of time. But then there are the unofficial references. Unofficial references are not given to you on a list from the candidate, but they're people that you know who know the candidate. I'm a big fan of unofficial references, but I'm going to make some caveats here. If you are talking about a person who is gainfully employed right now, you have to be very careful calling unofficial references because you don't want to put that person's job in danger. So be very, very, very careful. Whoever it is you're going to call about that person, make sure you know them and trust them and they can keep a secret. And you say, hey, I just want to know what you think about Bob. I'm thinking about hiring him. I think he's great. What do you know about him? If you want to be extra special careful, you can say, what do you think about Bob? And you don't say why you're asking. So anyway, make sure you can have a confidential conversation with them, or if you can't, my suggestion is don't do it. I think it's a little bit risky. And my last comment though is if I had a dime for every time I heard someone say, I can't believe they hired Bob. He worked for me 2 years ago. We had to fire him. He was terrible. I don't know why. They didn't just pick up the phone and call me. They know me. They know Bob worked for me. I don't know why they wouldn't take that time because I could have prevented a lot of heartache. So take that to heart when it comes to reference checking. All right, now let's talk about test projects briefly. If you've gotten to this stage and you're not 100% sold on the candidate, you're not sure you want to make an offer, maybe you're worried that the candidate is all sizzle and no steak, here's an idea. You can ask them to do a short-term project for you, or ask them to just do a little bit more. Maybe it's a writing sample, maybe it's an actual project for pay. If it's big enough, I think you need to pay them. If it's small, you don't necessarily have to do that. But ask them to do a little bit more work for you so that you can see whether or not they're a fit. An example, give them an existing policy paper and ask them to create a press release about it, right? Or ask them to write an editorial piece on behalf of your organization about a current event that's relevant to something that your organization is engaging in. You get the idea. Hopefully it's something you can actually use, your organization can actually use. Be reasonable about the time investment, especially if the person is gainfully employed. You have to understand they may be working late hours, may have to work on the weekends, so they may not have time to do it. So give them enough time to complete it. And just remember that the data points you gather from this test project will probably help sway you one way or the other in terms of whether or not you make an offer. Now, my word of warning about that, a lot of candidates will be offended that you've asked them to do more work. Again, let's compare it to dating. If a woman has been dating you for long enough and you can't decide if you want to put a ring on her finger, she might be willing to walk away, right? So be careful, because you could offend a candidate who says, you already have enough information about me. You should know whether or not you want to put a ring on this finger. And if you're not sure, then I'm not interested. So that could happen. Be aware. All right, finally, I want to talk about intangibles. So are there clues you picked up along the way that might help you understand whether or not this person is going to be a fit for you? So let me throw out some intangibles. Did it take the candidate 3 times to send the correct application materials? Because if so, I think that's a really big red flag, right? Especially for a communications director. Was he early to the interview? Was he late? Because guess what? If he was late, he might be late to a meeting with a donor or a reporter. So it's something to think about. Did he or she dress professionally? Because they're probably going to dress that same way once you hire them and put them in front of the media, etc. So be aware. Did they send a thank you note after the interview? I am a stickler for old-fashioned thank you notes, especially if we're talking about a communications director, right? And so people who send me an old-fashioned thank you note, they are always, I literally note it in my database because it's like a gold star. I think it's a big deal. If they didn't, you get like 1 or 2 points for a follow-up email, but you get like 10 points for a follow-up handwritten thank you card. Was the person polite to your staff, all of your staff members? Were they polite to the receptionist as well as the president and CEO? Because that stuff matters. Who knows, the receptionist might end up being the CEO. What about email writing and spelling? Were their emails atrocious? Were they filled with grammatical errors and spelling errors? Because if so, and you're hiring this person to do communications, that's a red flag, right? Were they responsive over email, or did it take them 2 days to respond to every email? Right, that's a problem too. That's probably how responsive they're going to be to their media contacts, right? Did they need hand-holding in the test project, or were they the kind of person who just ran with it and got her done? These are the things that you should think about during the interview process. And this is one reason I don't mind when the interview process stretches on a few weeks, not a few months, but a few weeks, because it gives you a chance to see even more of these intangibles. All right, with that, I've ended 30 minutes in and we've got time for questions. I do have one question that Nicole sent me in advance. I'm going to go ahead and throw out here because I do have some quick thoughts on it. How do you create effective incentive systems for this role to drive tangible results? I know Nicole will probably have more brilliant thoughts, but the one thing I want to say is pay them for performance. So if you've got a communications director who's doing a bang up job, pay them a competitive salary. And then if they're meeting and exceeding expectations, give them raises appropriately and give them performance bonuses appropriately. If you do that, you are going to set up a pretty good incentive structure for them. The last thing I'll say on that is incentives are different for everybody. So we always talk about the almighty dollar. I think it matters, and it probably matters more than other things. But you may be working with someone who says, you know what? I don't need $5,000 more. I want to work from home 1 or 2 days a week because I want to pick up my kids after school. So if you give them that kind of flexibility, you may not have to pay them anymore, but you're paying them in flexibility. And that's the sort of thing that might incentivize the person to stick with you and do a great job. With that, I'll let Nicole throw out any questions that she can.
Sure. And, the follow up on the question on how to incentivize people, usually when I hear that question, there's a problem. And the problem can be in a couple of places. One of them's you. Did you communicate the strategic marketing plan well, or did they develop one with you? If you don't have a really clear goal that they're aiming for and a way for them to make day-to-day decisions to get there, it's hard to say we're measuring you against this. Or maybe they're not doing a good job. And then, of course, what Claire said, ways to incentivize them, like to give them rewards for good work, because I think that's really important that people can see that. Okay, so now I have one. It's back to ideological alignment. And remember, folks, if you want to ask more questions, just hit the Q&A button. I think it's at the top of your screen, but if not, look down at the bottom and just throw your question out there. How do they test, or how does one test for ideological alignment? For us, there are efficacy and legal concerns with how to do this well. Yeah. So it's back to the philosophical alignment.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple thoughts. I will say that I stay away from the word political like the plague, because I think it's actually true in some places, not here. Well, I shouldn't say that. I actually think it might be true here in South Carolina. But you can't discriminate based on political affiliation. And so if you ask people questions about their philosophy, not politics, but philosophy, people tend to hear it as, oh, she just asked me about my politics. And you can't do that. You can't discriminate against me because I'm a Democrat, whatever, or a liberal. So I stay away from the word political, which is convenient and very easy for me because I don't work in the political world. I work in the philosophical world. Now, a lot of the public thinks that what we do is politics, and that's something I can't overcome. But I do avoid the word, which counts for something. So I always ask people, tell me more about your philosophical interest in my client's mission. That's usually my start. I'll also ask very specific questions about what my client engages in. So if I'm working with an ed reform group, I might ask very specific questions about, tell me about your thoughts about vouchers or about school choice or, that kind of thing. I try to stay very, very connected to the facts and the policy issues specifically. I don't talk about, broad brushstrokes, ideological labels. I really try to stick to, what is your opinion on this issue? What is your opinion on that issue? Now, I'm not going to lie to you. It's really difficult to get to that. It'd be a lot easier if I could just say, are you a classical liberal? Or are you a progressive? Are you a conservative? But I think that's dangerous for a few reasons. One, you get people confused about the whole, you can't discriminate against me because I'm a lefty. But also, it doesn't really get at what you want. What you want is someone who is aligned with you on the particular issues. And often people will tell you, people who maybe haven't been in this world or haven't thought about these ideas a lot, they'll tell you, oh, I'm an X, but it doesn't actually mean they agree with you on the issues. So there's sometimes a difference between labels and how people actually feel. So I think it's easier to just go straight for the issue. So blah, 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 all this to say, I think you need to ask questions that are very, very specific to your mission. The other thing I'll say is, a lot of the folks that we encounter, and we don't encounter many, but a lot of the folks we encounter who are not aligned with our work, they just didn't read carefully. And so I like to direct them back to my client's website and say, tell me more about this. And it is hilarious. A lot of them will be like, oh, I went back to the website. I think what they do is horrifying. Oh my gosh, they believe in personal responsibility. I want nothing to do with them. And I say, okay, thank you for your time. So self-selection is a powerful tool, and you may want to use that first. You may want to say, go to my website, make sure you're stoked about the ideas, and then get back to me. Okay, I'll stop rambling on that. I hope that was helpful.
So that was helpful. There's a follow-up question about this topic. So I do have another question, but we'll go to the follow-up question because it's topically related. What is the best thing to do if after hiring you realize that there is a philosophical misalignment?
Oh my gosh.
It's a hard one, I know. Cry.
Start drinking immediately. No, honestly, I'm not just saying this because I'm married to one, but I might consider calling an employment attorney, because if you're thinking about letting the person go, the last thing you want to do is let this person go and then get sued for discrimination. Now, again, this whole like discrimination based on political affiliation, it's not widespread. Like I said, I think South Carolina has some kind of statute, and I only know that because the husband has told me this. But I think most places don't. But now just wait for it, because if it's not already there, it's going to come to DC, it's going to come to New York, it's going to come to California, and then who knows what it will do. But that could become more prevalent. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're thinking you want to can someone, and then you do, and then you get sued. So if you consult an attorney and you tell the attorney what's going on, that person's probably going to give you the best advice possible. And I hate to say it, but that's where I'm going to leave it, because the last thing I want is y'all to get in legal hot water. So I'm going to punt and go to the attorneys.
Yeah. What about keeping people, like doing that 60-day trial, like, you know what I mean?
The at will kind of like, we'll have a
it's like the first 60 days. Yeah. If you meet performance benchmarks, it becomes a full-time position, but it's like I forget the word for it because my brain stopped working today, but it's pretty much how we hire everybody is 60 days.
Yep.
Our trial period.
So I love the idea because it's low risk. I always try to tell candidates there's so much upside there, because candidates tend to be freaked out by it. Well, what if they don't like me after 60 or 90 days? Then they can just fire me. And I want to say, they can fire you anyway, at will employment. So it doesn't really matter what the paper says. You can get fired anytime. And are you not confident in your work? So I'm always telling candidates, don't be afraid of that. But my response is, you have to be careful, because a lot of candidates will run the other way, especially if they have, a family to support and they're the sole breadwinner. They're going to be very conscious of taking a risk like that, where they think that they know every job could end at any point. But when the client is actually saying to them, sign this document that says I may can you in 60 or 90 days if I don't like what I'm seeing, it just sort of raises the risk level in their minds. So I'd be careful about that. But I certainly think it's a good way to do it. I mean, and I always tell candidates, if it doesn't work out, it can appear on your resume as contract work, assuming you are hired as a contractor for that period and then you're brought on full-time afterwards. If it doesn't work, you could just say you were hired as a contractor. It's a really easy out and a very easy thing to explain on your resume.
Okay. I have another one on philosophy, but I'm going to interject a different topic for a moment just because it's fun that way. So this comes from Scott. What is the benefit of multiple in-person interviews? Mm-hmm. Should they interview with different people? Are multiple interviews better than one good interview?
Yes, 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 and yes. I love multiple interviews because it's multiple data points. How many times have I heard or experienced myself a situation in which the first interview, everybody's in love, everyone's seeing like hearts in their eyes, and then by the third interview, we're seeing cracks in the facade. So anyone can perform really well for one interview, but it's really difficult to do that over the course of 3, 4, or 5 interviews. So that's why I like multiple interviews. Same reason for why I like multiple people interviewing the person, because everyone has different perspectives, and you could see how a candidate might perform really well with a certain personality, but then they interview with a different personality and it all falls apart. So I would absolutely recommend that you don't hire unilaterally, that you do involve staff members. Now, I don't think you need to involve every staff member. I mean, seriously, it's like a point of contention and really a point of joking with some of my candidates, because they'll say, I literally met with every staff member and there were 30, something crazy like that. I think that's overkill. I don't think you need to do that. But I'd want at least, 3 or 4 people involved in the interview process, if it were me.
Makes sense. Okay, now we're back to philosophy. And this is, as a follow-up, we once asked an employee to read The Virtue of Selfishness so we could debate it. The
Ooh.
employee was super offended and left. If instead of firing with them, we want to keep/convert them, any suggestions? This could just be good for us skills wise, which is an awesome question. I just wanted to get that other interview question in.
Oh my gosh. Wait, so what is the question? Should we do this? Should we scare them off?
I think where the person's coming from is they have hired people who are not 100% there, and they want to work with them to hopefully convert them to their perspective, just as they, to transition to a cultural fit. And part of the question, I'm getting a follow-up text from them, is do we try to convert, and if so, how?
Oh my goodness gracious. So funny answer to that. I have found that the only way that I've successfully converted someone philosophically is to date them. I'm not joking. I converted a super liberal guy into a super libertarian guy. It took a long time, and I ended up breaking up with him, so it really wasn't a good ROI. But the point is, I think it takes a long time to get someone to change philosophically. And it's not something personally that I'm interested in doing. I want to hire somebody who's gangbusters excited about what we're doing, because I want to spend my time working with them to achieve our mission, not to help them understand why free markets rock. Now, so my point would be, don't hire people who aren't aligned. Don't find yourself in this situation again. But here we are, and so what do you do? I don't know that I would take it upon myself to convert them, because who's qualified to do that? I mean, how do you do that? Like, ask the people you know who have been converted, and their stories are often things like, well, I dated Claire. I'm kidding. It was only one guy. But I had a college professor who changed my way of thinking. That's the one I hear more often than not. It's someone over a long period of time, right? A semester, 2 semesters, who changed my thinking. Well, do you have time to do that? If so, awesome. If not, I'm not sure how you're going to do that successfully. So I don't know if it's something I would recommend. But I also think we come back to self-selection here. If you talk to that person and you say, I want you to be excited about our ideas, get their take on it. If they say, well, I'm not, and I'm not going to be, well, then that's really easy. Now, again, if they say I'm not, and I'm not going to be, don't haul off and fire them, because you could find yourself in legal hot water. But I think I'd probably start there if I was going to do it at all. I would find out what their level of interest was, in even, being open to changing their philosophy.
Good. Sorry, I had mute on and had to turn it back off. It's funny. I have seen this work and not work both at the receptionist level, where it was just a very good receptionist who was not philosophically aligned and didn't care. And over time, the person became more free market oriented, although not all that interested in diving into the deep thinking or philosophical works. And they actually liked that person in the position on the phone when people are calling and pushing for what's your organizational philosophy. And she's like, I don't know. I'm just the receptionist. I'm here to do a job, so, but that was for a larger organization. And that was part of their strategy of, they need to talk to the media person. Their media person totally understood, though. So yeah, I agree. It's hard. A lot of the work that Spark Freedom does is learning how to meet people where they are and move them over time. But it is a long overtime thing. And it's got to be pull, not push. You're inviting people along the path with you. And sometimes they're like, I don't like this road. And that is what it is. So I have one more question. So, and this is the last. We are considering hiring an outside PR firm to work with our communications director that is pure social justice warrior type with the theory, that so that they can help convert our message to be more compatible with the left. Is that risky? So they're looking to hire a PR firm that is very progressive, under the hope that their understanding of that perspective will get them a more left-friendly message. Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Oh, I'm dying to hear what you have to say. Don't
do it. I would not do it. Like there is so much strategy about what you're doing that you have to have your PR firm in the know on. Now, that doesn't mean that your PR firm has to be 100% philosophically aligned. A PR firm like Behrman, for example, we were just talking about them before, may or may not be philosophically aligned, the person you're working with, but they're balanced. When you say social justice warrior type, I'm thinking somebody who is militantly unwilling to look at any other perspective beyond their own. And I don't think that they can, I mean, they will give you that perspective, and the perspective they're going to give you is that you're evil and that you need to, so like that, I wouldn't go that way. I mean, oh my goodness, like you'll have headache after headache. Yeah. Claire, what do you think?
I was going to say, I'm so intrigued by this notion, because I do think our side has, we're really bad at understanding messaging that will appeal to those types. So I'm intrigued by it, but I just kept thinking, danger, Will Robinson. Like I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, but you gave a more substantive response to why it's a bad idea. And I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense. Ask your progressive friend, like keep the stakes low, and now I guess your progressive friend may not understand messaging, but I think it's risky. Obviously I'm risk averse in a lot of ways when it comes to talent and these kinds of things. So my gut's with you.
Well, and there are lots of ways to expose yourself, like go to left-leaning conferences. They come to ours, go to theirs if that's where you want to go. Get out in the community and start to, like go volunteer on your, farmers market board, or we have in ours, we have leadership decab, which is like this, you do service projects all over the county. And what'll happen in those situations is people from all different philosophical and political perspectives are there, and you just start talking with them in a way that's not like my way's the right way and your way's the wrong way, which is what it's tempting to do on our side. We do that a lot. And listen to what they say, and then that gives you something you can test, because a good market research firm can help you test some of these approaches. But if they're already like, if they're already like militantly against you, it's going to be a really tough row to hoe. But if you do try that, by the way, let us know how it goes. Okay, I said that was the last question, but there's one more, because everybody loves Claire. Okay, do you think the methodology captured in the book Who, the method for hiring is great, applicable to our world? And I don't know this book, so I'm hoping you do.
And I don't, so I don't know. I don't know if it's brilliant.
Well,
but I do have one more thought on the other topic about the progressive firm. We all have a friend who used to be a lefty progressive and came over to this way of thinking. It might be worth throwing out some of your messages to that person. Just have them over for dinner and say, what about this? Because if that person will be able to draw on their roots and say, here's how it would have hit me back then. Because someone who's always been a free marketeer, I think it's really hard for us to put ourselves in their shoes. So I've got a good friend who's a huge progressive, and he's a college professor. He's indoctrinating many young minds. It's awful. Anyway, I love to talk to him about these ideas, because I love his pushback. And then I take that pushback and I think, how can I better relate to the next conversation I have with a progressive? So anyway, that might be another idea, is just literally sit down and talk to somebody who used to be on that side, but now they're with us, because they'll understand both perspectives.
Yeah, I think we've got a new Spark session idea.
Yeah.
Like different ways, strategies of learning from the left. There's a lot you can learn. It's funny, because when we were working on developing a donor privacy message and understanding of how people's minds are, left-leaning people are much more likely to want to support the concept of protecting donor privacy once you start talking to them, the right people, right-leaning people, interestingly enough. Yeah. But at the time, we thought it was the opposite. And so I was having all these conversations with people like, what's your perspective? What do you think about this? And part of that unearthed a very valid concern that lots of money influences policy, and I don't like that. So like the $100 donor I want to protect, but the $3 million donor I don't, because they have all the right. And we may not agree with that perspective, but that's a very valid concern that has to be addressed when you're talking about the topic, or you're going to lose. And so I do I mean, like the conversation, Eric, this is a great question. That coming at it from that way is really important, I think, to your success, because you're going to need to know what you're up against. So you're going down the right road. Anyway, so that's my final third time final thought on that topic. So Claire, thanks for coming. We usually do Spark sessions every third Thursday, everyone. Next month we won't, because the topic we're going to do next month is a follow-up on the marketing collaboratory event that we're having in November, where a bunch of marketing people from the private sector and from our world are getting together and running through some projects so that they can be brainstormed and critiqued and hopefully accelerated to be more successful. And that event ends the day before the Spark session, and the people we want to have on the Spark session will be in airplanes. So we will schedule it not in the middle of Thanksgiving week, a little bit later, and we'll just keep you apprised via email. And there was a question I answered via text earlier about, will there be a recording? Yes. We will be processing this and putting it out on the blog next week. It'll go out on the Spark Freedom email list. If you're not signed up for that, please go over to sparkfreedom.org and sign up for our email. And hopefully we can also get some of these resources that Claire has to you. Just let us know if you want. I'm assuming you don't want them posted on the interwebs.
Yeah, I don't want the progressives to get them.
Right, so there you go. So we'll email those to you too. We can email it to the attendee list from the Zoom meeting. So if you RSVP'd to this via Zoom, then you'll get that. And if not, send an email to Claire or to me. Do you want to email you?
Either way, yeah, that's fine.
What's your email?
Claire@talentmarket.org.
Claire@talentmarket.org. Or if you email Nicole at sparkfreedom.org, I will totally get the message to her. So Claire, thank you so much for coming. This was great. And your email is in the text so people can grab it.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.